All right, well, not quite everyone's here yet, but we'll go ahead and get started to be mindful of the time. Hopefully everyone got a good night's sleep last night. At 11 o'clock this morning, I'm happy to be on East Coast time, but at 6:30 last night, I was wishing I was on Pacific time, so a little jealous of those of you in the middle of the country. So let's go ahead and jump into, today we have 3 sessions. It's our last day with 3 sessions. The rest of the workshop days will have 2 sessions, except for the half days where we'll just have a morning session. So that's this Friday, and then next Thursday, we'll just have morning sessions. So yesterday we talked a lot about learning objectives and worked on our module outlines. I have to say that I was really impressed, and in talking with the other co-PIs, I heard that a lot with the amount of work you got done, the depth of thought, the ideas, the high quality of your learning objectives, the way you were thinking about the taxonomy as well. In fact, a common theme I heard was that each of you were trying to do so much in your modules. So I think the theme today may be making sure that we're hitting the right balance. And so I think we'll talk about those in some of your small groups. So that's really awesome. I was really excited for all the work that you all accomplished yesterday. Just wanted to give you a kind of that overview again, so you could see where we're going. Today we're going to talk about authentic tasks and start to talk about learning activities, and then we'll talk about learning activities more over the next couple of days, really working to develop a strong final learning activity anchored in an authentic task, while also developing maybe some smaller learning activities that students would engage in along the way. Smaller, not necessarily in what you're requiring of students, but maybe not hitting the same highest levels on Bloom's taxonomy. And then we'll spend a lot of time after, once those learning activities are developed, working also on building the instructional content. So just to give you that kind of big picture view. So now to zoom in on today, we're going to talk about this morning. We have an hour-and-a-half session. Today's structure will be the same as yesterday's structure. We'll talk about cognitive demand tasks and authentic tasks today. Then during the session 2, we're going to talk about the learning activities and the kind of template and structure that we use for learning activities in HydroLearn. And Jenny's also going to present to us about iframes. So you'll be learning about some of the tools in HydroLearn to set up your learning activities. And then we'll start to, and then you'll work on creating a learning activity. So your goal for today is you'll have kind of 2 different goals. One will be to come up with 3 different authentic tasks. And then one will be to take one of those tasks and start to develop that into a learning activity for your students, for your module. So I realized that I should have said this yesterday. You all are adults and professionals, and anytime you need to take a break or you need to run out or you need to grab lunch, just use your professional discretion. No need to, if I jump in, if you're during your partner work time and one of us comes into your group and you're not there, no need to feel bad, like take your breaks as needed. So I probably should have mentioned that yesterday. We're also, as you probably noticed yesterday, not breaking at a specific time for lunch because we are all in so many different time zones. So where it works for you and your partner, be sure to take your breaks as needed. So our goals today are to compare and contrast high and low cognitive demand tasks. Hopefully we'll set up kind of a debate for you on that today, because it's not always as cut and dry as we like to think. To work on creating high cognitive demand tasks and integrating these into learning activities, and to begin designing learning activities that align with your learning objectives and your content. So I wanted to do a check-in and say, what have you been thinking about with regard to your module since yesterday? Jenny, are breakout rooms ready for us to jump into our breakout rooms?
Not quite. I'm almost done.
All right. So maybe let's have this as a whole group conversation. Who wants to, you can either jump in the chat or you can jump in by unmuting yourself. But what have you been thinking about with regard to your module since yesterday? I see some people going for the chat option. A need to scale back. I hear you, David. Your group has a lot going on. Lots of great ideas, though. Good point, Hillary. I heard a lot of conversations yesterday about where to put the programming or how to access data, especially considering the idea of keeping things open source. Yeah, that's important too, Joanne. Yay, Willie's excited. I like that feedback from Imad about telling a story.
Okay, they're ready, Melissa.
That's okay. Well, okay, why don't we go into our breakout rooms then and continue this conversation with your partners. What's something that you've been thinking about? And we're probably only going to spend maybe like 8 minutes in your breakout room. So don't take your excitement and start changing lots of things, but maybe make notes about what your thoughts are. All right, Jenny, you want to go ahead and open the rooms for us?
Did. Got it.
Thank you. All right, hopefully you were having some good conversations in your groups. Where I was, we were having a good chat. And I'm really excited at the energy around this. So we're going to keep revisiting this idea of constructive alignment because it's really going to anchor how we develop the modules. So once again, talking about constructive alignment means we're thinking about our learning objectives, and you have thought about those a lot at this point. And then we're going to tie those to assessment to make sure that they're aligned with each other. And we're going to tie that to instruction. And by planning it all out ahead of time, we'll create something that's constructively aligned. And as we plan it out, we're also going to go in and kind of test different parts and kind of really go through it with a fine-tooth comb, because it's so easy. You write your learning objectives, you create an assessment that you think matches, and if you don't really look at it in detail, you'll notice that you end up adding extra things or omitting learning objectives. It's incredibly easy to do that. And again, we're going to think about this from a backwards design perspective. So yesterday we identified desired results with our learning objectives by creating learning objectives. So today we're going to talk about the second step in backwards design, which is determining acceptable evidence, which would be assessments. And for the purposes of HydroLearn, we consider the learning activities to be the primary assessments. Check your understandings have two foci. One could be to be an assessment, but another could be more of a learning experience where students are checking their own learning. So those check your understanding little quizzes could fall into either of these categories. So today we're really going to talk about the culminating assessment task, or the big learning activity that students might do. Usually they do towards the end of the module, if not at the very end. So defining learning activities, and then that final culminating task would be that authentic task, that real world task. So to recap about learning objectives, we have the 4 parts with the SWABOT in the middle, with the condition and degree being optional, the action being based on Bloom's taxonomy, and the task, the noun, the thing that they're doing. Thinking about kind of thinking about a few things, 2 main things with our learning objectives. One is that they should represent different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, not necessarily an even distribution, but a distribution that makes sense for your course. One way that we can help to kind of determine and check over our learning objectives if they represent different levels is to label the level. So I saw a lot of people yesterday putting in parentheses or brackets that this learning objective is a level 1, or it's a level 3, or it's an analyze. And so that really helps to kind of look for those levels. And the other is to check that we've used measurable verbs. I was really pleasantly surprised. I expected to see know or understand somewhere in someone's learning objectives, and I didn't see a single one yesterday. So good on you all. I still slip and use understand sometimes. It's so easy to do. Jenny is clapping for you. So we're going to spend 10 minutes back in our partner groups, and just your goal here is to review your learning objectives double check that they represent different levels of blooms. You can label by level if you haven't done that yet, and double check that they use measurable verbs. If you've done both of those things, then you can kind of start talking through maybe some of your higher level learning objectives and talking through with your partner, what does this learning objective look like to me? What does it look like to compare and contrast the two different models, or to analyze the design of this, or to create a design for something. So we're going to go back into our groups, and you're going to look at these two things. If you represent different levels of blooms, and if you use measurable verbs. If you've done those two, then you're going to think about your highest level learning objectives, talk through like, what does that look like if students are accomplishing that. All right, let's join our rooms. All right, so the thing about learning objectives is that it is possible to debate them and debate the details of every little word for months. So I will pull together breakout rooms, and at a certain point we cut our losses and move forward, right? So there's plenty of time to continue to revise and iterate these as we go forward. But I heard some really great conversations happening in the rooms, especially talking through what are we expecting of students. And that really will lead us into, that's really strongly related to cognitive constructive alignment of what are we looking for, and then how will we know if students are exhibiting this learning objective, what does it mean that they'll be doing? And that will help us think about cognitive demand of tasks. So for those of you who've completed HydroLearn 101, we're going to talk about high versus low cognitive demand tasks. And I'm using the word task, but essentially what the word task means in math education is any problem that we ask students to solve. So for instance, the problem set at the end of the chapter in your textbook, those are all tasks. But that doesn't mean that they're high cognitive demand tasks. In fact, tasks in textbooks have a tendency to be more low cognitive demand because they typically have one right answer and require students to apply a procedure that was taught earlier in that chapter. So we're going to talk about low versus high cognitive demand tasks. And a disclaimer I want to say at the beginning is that we are by no means saying that there should be no low cognitive demand tasks. Sometimes you have to teach students a formula and show them how to get the data and then ask them to do it. And that's giving them a procedure and they're following it and there's one right answer, so it counts as low. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't use low cognitive demand tasks. What this means is that the cognitive demand of your task should match the cognitive demand of your learning objective. If you have a learning objective that's at a low cognitive demand, then the task that goes with that should be low. If you have a learning objective at a high cognitive demand, then your task that goes with that should be at a high cognitive demand. So when we think about this, oftentimes people think, oh, low cognitive demand, she's telling me I can't do that. I am not saying that at all. We just don't want only low cognitive demand tasks. We want to push students to think bigger, broader, and to kind of build those higher cognitive skills. So low cognitive demand tasks, as you read in HydroLearn 101, include lots of guidance. So if the text models how to solve an equation and then asks the students to apply that formula using new data, then I'm just asking you to follow the steps or procedure I just gave you. And typically low cognitive demand tasks have just one right answer. That's an easy way to identify them. They might ask students to reproduce a definition. So if I say a multiple choice item that says, well, actually, we'll look at some examples in a minute, but if I'm asking students for a definition and give them multiple choice, or even if I just say, what's the definition of runoff, and ask them to write it, if I'm asking them to kind of give me back information that I gave to them in exactly the same form, then that would count probably as a low cognitive demand task. So if I'm asking them to reproduce definitions, explanations, formulas, or principles, so a reproduction of something I already gave them. Or if I'm asking them to follow a script, so I gave them a list of instructions and they just have to replicate that. So maybe I want them to delineate a watershed, and I have a screencast where I delineate a watershed, and then I say, now you go do it with this watershed. They're not doing anything new. They're just following the steps I've given them. And again, that's not a bad thing to ask students to do. If that's something they need to know how to do, then we'll include that kind of task. We just don't want all tasks to be like that. High cognitive demand tasks may include some guidance for students, but also require them to access their own background knowledge or to play around with and try things out on their own. High cognitive demand tasks also typically have multiple correct answers, where the correctness of an answer is based on how students apply their content knowledge and justify decisions. This doesn't mean that any answer could be correct. Like sometimes there are very wrong answers, but that there could be more than one correct answer. And authentic tasks fall within high cognitive demand tasks. They're like a subset. And authentic tasks, Doug's going to talk about that specific subset of tasks in just a few minutes. High cognitive demand tasks also ask students to engage in practices where they have to make sense of the content and recognize how the scientific body of knowledge is developed. So more understanding that, the design process, or kind of the empirical scientific method process, anything that's asking them to engage in that kind of sense making would be considered high cognitive demand task. So there are actually four levels of cognitive demand of tasks. However, we often group them into the 2 lowest and 2 highest and just talk about high versus low, live long and prosper, because there's so much debate about what constitutes each one. So we are going to look at some tasks that come from HydroLearn. And again, it's not bad to have low cognitive demand tasks in HydroLearn. So there's no knocking on anyone who created low, because we do need both types. So what I'd like you to do is I'm going to put up several tasks. Take a look at the task, and then you can either use your computer to respond at this website, or you could text in your response if you prefer. And I'd like to know, is this a high or a low cognitive demand task? All right, well, we seem mostly in agreement here. That's good. This is more of a definitional type, vocabulary type item. And so those are totally okay. Learning new vocabulary is important, and including vocabulary tasks as a check your understanding in HydroLearn certainly makes a lot of sense. In this case, it's a low cognitive demand task. All right, let's look at the next one. Here we go. Take a look at this task and let's vote again. What do you think about this one? All right, so it looks like everyone here is saying hi. That's interesting. I thought this one would spark more of a debate. So this one, okay, so we have some people saying some Someone saying low. I guess that means about 20 people have voted. If each person is 5%.
Well, there's low cognitive aspects, like is the watershed rural or urban? That's pretty low. But when you asked to write a description, you have to kind of think about the high level things.
Does anybody want to comment on what Dave contributed?
I'll jump in. Actually, this is the one where it falls between, in my judgment, because it does involve some sort of judgment on the part of the students. They need to think about it. I would say either falls between like number 3 and number 4 on the Bloom's taxonomy. And that's where it goes either way in my judgment in there.
I picked low because it looks like it fit level 2 of understanding to me.
So Gianna, you and Zudi both mentioned the Bloom's taxonomy.
Yeah, I went with level 2.
So let's hear somebody who said fully high. What is your thinking on that?
Well, if I gave this to my class, I would expect my class to treat it as a high cognitive demand task. However, I know some of my students would sleepwalk their way through this because there's just enough of a constraint on what you have to do that there are people who would just list this watershed is an urban watershed. Here are the structures in the watershed. Here are the physical features that were mentioned directly in the module. So I think to some degree it's up to the student in this case.
So if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, you see in the high cognitive category under evaluate there's select, and they actually have to select the information to present. Under analyze there's also organize, and they have to organize how they present the information. So those could be rationales for putting it as high. And also when we get to looking at rubrics, one might think about looking for careful selection and good organization in the way this is done.
But I think about the point about how the students are going to respond to that is a pretty important one. If this is intended to be a high-level assessment, maybe it needs to be written a little bit in a different way that will not let students sleepwalk through it. Certainly the rubric can account for that too.
Yeah, everybody is making great points.
I think that number 2, it's asking you to draw a connection among ideas, which is what the little subtext under analyze is. You're relating the physical features to runoff and then the runoff to the design. So it's not just to understand. I think it's taking it to the higher level there, if done correctly.
I would say that it's a higher level problem because it requires the student to make multiple choices that require judgment.
Tell us more about where you see those choices, David.
So first, is it rural or urban? That's a choice. And then are there structures? That's a choice, right? So that already complicates things. And then, so then at each, as we progress through the set of statements, then there's a growing number of opportunities for which the project might go in. And the students have to think about each of those choices and keep them in their head rather than just check off a box, right? So the problem becomes more complicated as you go through it, and that requires thought and evaluation.
I think there's also there is this element of justifying that because question 2 is asking how might the physical features affect runoff, they need to justify their decision there. So in a way, it's really useful to look at these questions and think about where you think that they should fall in Bloom's taxonomy, because then you could put that in your rubric, that you will get credit for evaluating or defending your choice here, or something like that.
Yeah, let me ask you, Melissa. So when I looked at it, I thought like number 1 is a low, number 2 is a high. And so I elected, actually, even though I knew, that's why I mentioned like between 3 and 4, and elected to go with the high because of number 2. Now, if you are faced with this choice, which way you go? You know, this is made of like 2 more or less tasks. Something has to do with selection. I don't think it's a high demand to select between rural and urban setting, or even to identify the different components like structures in there. But when it comes to number 2, there is some higher level of thinking involved in here. And so, go
Great
ahead.
question.
Yeah.
So the reason I put this task in here is for a few reasons. One is because we often think if a task has a lot of words, that makes it high cognitive demand, and as many people have argued, this might not necessarily be high cognitive demand. And also, a few people pointed out, like Joe and Dave pointed out, that the rubric really might tell you more about if it's high cognitive demand or not. And the way that we talk about that is it's the enactment. So I can write a task that seems like a low cognitive demand task, but if I ask my students to do a lot with it by telling them they're going to be evaluated at a high level on the rubric, like that they would have to justify and explain their thinking really in depth to get all the points, then I'm making it a higher level task when I enact it. Conversely, if the rubric for this just looked at if the student answered all the questions, then as Erin mentioned, you might get students who are just kind of phoning it in, giving an answer for each item, and that might make it a lower cognitive demand task. So this is an item that could go either way based on how the instructor implemented it. And in a module like HydroLearn, that really would be reflected in the rubric. I really like Joe's idea of making justification a part of the rubric, asking for that.
I got to say, this is a really interesting discussion. The thing I love best about this one is that Melissa's guiding us. The way she's asking these questions, she's actually making us do higher level cognitive thinking in your task. So Melissa could just be throwing out, true, false questions, but wow, just the analysis everybody was doing and defending justifying their answer and why is this the correct answer and so forth. That's a good model for what we're trying to get our students to do.
Thanks, Dan. I agree. I'm hearing lots of good thinking.
Good higher level task.
Thanks, David.
You didn't give us a grading rubric for it, but
nobody's being graded on this. I want to go back to a question Christina put in the chat. So she asked a very common question about, isn't high or low relative to the student baseline experience? And so this may be splitting hairs, but I would argue that something could be easy or hard based on the student's baseline experience. But if you think about if students are ready for this task, is it asking them to think more deeply or is it not? So for instance, if I asked a ninth grader to do some differential equations, that would be too hard for them. But if they were ready for it, then just following the procedures of differentiating might not be a high cognitive demand task, if that makes sense. So we assume that it's that they're ready for it. I really appreciate all the praise, everybody. Now I'm going to give you another task to consider. Yeah, there we go. Here is another task. All right, well, we seem pretty unanimous on this one. Would someone who talked about they thought it was low tell us why they identified it that way?
Well, we give them step-by-step instructions what to do. There is not much thinking involved in here.
There's really one correct answer too.
And it may be that delineating a watershed is a more advanced skill, but it's still the way that they're being asked to do it is by following a set of steps. And even at the bottom here, it says your watershed should look similar to the image below. And I know that this is part of a bigger task that asks students to take this and do more with it. The jokes in the chat box are just making me smile over here. So, so that is why I would classify this one as low, for the reasons that Willie and Sudi said, as well as because it gives the image and everything. So this is an important maybe set of procedures for students to be familiar with, but it's not asking them to evaluate the watershed.
So can we just, I don't know if you had this in your discussion notes, but it'd be interesting just to quickly say, what would it take to take this activity and turn it into high cognitive? And I'm racking my brain here. The only thing I can think of on a simple watershed delineation would be to say, well, ask them to explore the result and explain why or why not it may or may not be accurate. That might require them to notice that there's a road passing through it, and there's probably a culvert that that moves the water in a different direction than the watershed itself is being delineated. It might be that they'll, if they're thinking, maybe they know that there's some information about a diversion or other kinds of diversions, or maybe there's a large flat area, and that the watershed delineation technique that we're using sort of has to guess the flat area. A lot of times you'll see like a straight river, and that rivers aren't straight. And so, I don't know, I'm just thinking, what could we do to take a simple watershed delineation and make it high cognitive?
Well, one way of making a simple watershed delineation, this is actually talking about doing it with an automated. There is delineation by interpretation from a contour map, a topo map, which I actually have my students do, and I say delineate the watershed to this point. Now, oftentimes there's some question like, okay, there's a roadway. How does the roadway impact the drainage? Where might there be culverts underneath this roadway that could cause the watershed to actually change? Because I tell my students, well, water does not flow over roadways typically. It will not flow over roadways. So you have to assume that there are culverts and bridges somewhere. And those are assumptions and interpretations, and then students justify. So there may not be one right answer to a watershed delineation.
Yeah, nice, I like that. And I think even with the tool, even using an automated tool, if they've learned the concepts underlying it, then you can ask them to analyze the results and decide if it's logical. I mean, Melissa, does that make it high cognitive if they're doing those kind of analyses that were just discussed?
Yeah, I definitely think it could. I also wonder if it needs to be high cognitive demand. If they need to learn how to do these steps using this software, then maybe low cognitive demand is the right level for this task.
For this specific task, yes, right? But I mean, the delineation needs to take into account all the things that Willie and Dan mentioned, right, by hand, which is...
And this isn't to even discuss places where you have glacial geology and all sorts of prairie potholes and wetlands where you don't know which way the water's flowing out. And there's lots of judgment involved in delineating an area that is very, very full of wetlands.
So I think there could be an argument made that this could be done as a high cognitive if your goal isn't just to grab a watershed, but your goal is, as David Tarbotton does in his hydrology class, you know, he goes into the very low level explanations of why and how and wants the students to really understand it. So there's probably, depending on the setting, it might be valuable to have it as a high cognitive. Thanks. I didn't want to divert too much there, Melissa, but I'm literally trying to think, how can you take some of these low cognitive and make them high cognitive?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Dan, and it's something that you have to consider as you're creating tasks. Christina put a question in the group, which I think, Christina, your idea is good. But one thing is that high cognitive demand tasks take longer. So if your goal is to really dig into watersheds and the delineation and all those decisions that Willie was talking about, that might be what the bulk of your module is about. And then your high cognitive demand task would be kind of evaluating all of that and delineating the watershed by hand. If your module has different goals, like I think the goal of this module is to get students to design a detention basin, then they need to delineate a watershed more quickly so that they can spend more cognitive energy on that, designing a detention basin. So one thing to think about is kind of your goal, your objectives, and your purpose as an instructor. And when you make a decision if you want to use a high or low cognitive demand task. See if I can switch the screen here. All right, and here's our last one we're going to talk about. Go ahead and read that and put in your vote. All right, I'm seeing a lot of high. So would anyone like to volunteer why they classified this as a high cognitive demand task?
Well, you're not telling people how to design the outlet structure. You're not telling them how to grade it out. There's the depth of the detention basin isn't set. Its location isn't necessarily set. And the results, what you're asking for is you just say document using graphics and tables and write a discussion. There's no right or wrong answer to this. It just has to be sufficient, and students will go, what's sufficient? They don't know, but it's definitely high cognitive demand, and you can have a discussion about what's sufficient documentation to achieve a good result. Maybe you'll have a rubric for what's sufficient or not, but you're not telling them exactly what's sufficient. So there's a lot that makes this a high cognitive demand task.
All right. Does anyone want to add on to what Willie said? No, he covered it all. Yeah, a few people anchored into the kind of ending point here of writing a discussion and how kind of open-ended that is. I like David Tarbotton's comment in the chat box. If this weren't high cognitive demand task, all engineers would be out of work. Yeah. Great, so I am in agreement with everything that Willie said. Is there anyone else who wants to add on?
Might be another where the rubric is important. I mean, you could think if a student has already done this a couple of times and you didn't have that section of write a discussion, they could potentially just pick a place that doesn't necessarily make sense and just run through a quick analysis to achieve the given result, the end design might not work very well. But if you don't ask them to defend that, then it's not necessarily that high cognitive. It could dip down and do maybe apply for at least the bulk of the work that the student's doing. But that's definitely not to say that I think it's a low.
I think that's a really good point in bringing us back to an earlier conversation about having students justify their thinking, and also how the rubric really shows how this is enacted in the expectations for students. Yeah, so if students, Christina's point is kind of building off what David Spellman just said, that if students have done this a lot before, they might be able to just replicate this process, and that wouldn't make it super high, or it would make it low. All right, yeah, so I think those are good points too, right? Where it's appropriate for students to be doing this kind of a task. All right, so this is an example of an authentic task. And so this is gonna take us into, Doug's gonna start presenting for us here. Doug, I'll give you remote control of my screen.
Great, thanks so much. So as Melissa said, authentic tasks are a subset of high cognitive demand tasks. And one way I like to think about it is that, as we strive to create these modules that include authentic learning or authentic tasks, it's really based on the realization that learning really is a social activity. If we think about how we learn in our professional lives, it's very embedded in various contexts. We want to learn something, we need to know that knowledge. And we're learning stuff that we really need and want to use. So, some might say that humans are thinking machines that feel, but I think in reality, students are feeling machines that think. So that emotional piece is something that we need to try to tap into. So, including authentic tasks can connect to that feeling side of students so that they see the relevance of what you're teaching them, and really motivate them to really go all in on those tasks that you're providing or teaching. I think most of the students that go in engineering really want to change the world. They're really problem solvers at heart. And so these authentic tasks that we can build into our courses really can possibly motivate them to really, connect to that passion, to bring that back in so they can really push through, some of the challenge that you present in your classes. So that engaging in those real context, solving real problems, being a real change maker. And as Emad said earlier, I think it's so important to really make these more like a story. I've heard that, curriculum writers really like to think about any kind of curricular activity really as a story, that it has, that engaging, the hook that draws you in, it keeps you engaged. There's a lot of conflict. All those aspects that we know that make up good stories really can be a part of our courses. And I think authentic tasks provide a mechanism for doing that. So as you see on your screen, these are some of the qualities, and there are others, but these are some of the main ones that we might consider when we think of an authentic task. So tasks that are in a context that really reflects the way that knowledge is used in real life. So if you think about how you are engineers in your field or data scientists, how would they really use that knowledge in their own field to solve problems, communicate issues, and so forth? That's really important. Also that it's complex and ill-defined, to echo the complexity that we find in the real world, so that they, those students are drawn into that conflict. It's very messy, but solvable, that there's, this is what engineers do, and that they see that that's how the engineering world is and our data science, and that's what we're about. We can go into that, wade into that complexity, that messiness, and solve problems through that. Also that, we encourage students to explore different perspectives. As many of you said in some of these analyses of the high cognitive demand tasks, there's not one right answer. There's many solutions or opportunities, I guess, to solve problems that you're teaching in your classes. So really designing those tasks so that brings that to the foreground would be really helpful. The next point about fostering that collaborative construction of knowledge. We know that as you work with colleagues, that's how we work, how engineers work. So there's so many reasons to facilitate that in your classes because it is authentic. but it's also a great way that supports how students learn. Enabling that meaningful reflection. You know, we want, as many of you said, we want students thinking. They should be engaging in activities and tasks that they really reflect back on those activities and see how it fits into their professional view of themselves as an engineer or a scientist. And finally, another great way to make it authentic is to incorporate those opportunities for the public presentation of an argument to give students the opportunity to defend their position. We know this is really part of so much of what we do as scientists and so forth. So how do I advance here? Whoops, okay. Yeah, so just to highlight, you know, the knowledge is used in real life. You know, you have these ill-defined complex problems, providing different perspectives that the students really wrestle with. Embed that collaborative opportunity for them to work together to construct understanding and also solutions to reflect meaningfully, and then perhaps doing that public presentation part. So when we give you feedback later on your modules, these are some of the things that, you know, we'll be thinking about when we look at them. You know, so do you require students to evaluate different options and make a decision on that? Does the task have just one correct answer? Or are there many solutions to that problem? Does it simulate the type of problems and maybe tools or tasks that an engineer might solve or use in their field, in their context? And build upon and complement the findings of other sections that you built up into that culminating task, and also definitely hits those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So I think now we're going to send you into your rooms. The point that I guess the task here is for you to look over your learning objectives, which I know some of you began before, to pick those that are at the higher level, and to try to brainstorm at least one, and you might be able to do more than one, authentic task. And it can be definitely at the conceptual level that might further the objectives of your module. When we come back, we're going to put you back into your larger groups, and then you're going to be sharing out. So you have to have at least one that's kind of ready to share out with others in the group. So Melissa, I don't know, do you want to say anything else before we send them off for this part? Sorry about that.
Sorry, we're both trying to manipulate my screen at the same time. So we're only gonna spend 10 minutes in the pairs, which I apologize for, because of time and wanting to abide by our morning session. And so, yeah, we're gonna kind of follow what Doug said, try to get an authentic task out there. We're going to spend 10 minutes on it. Then we'll talk a little bit in our small groups, and then you'll go forth and have the rest of the morning work session to work on revising your learning objectives and coming up with some authentic tasks. So this is meant to just be kind of a beginning conversations. You can come back to us with any challenges before we go out for your longer partner work time.
Okay, well,
all right, well, I apologize for pulling you in, but I wanted to kind of give one direction before we wrap up and go into our partner time. So we're gonna meet, we'll move into our partner work time now. What I'd like you to do is to come up with at least 3 different authentic tasks. They could all be related to the same learning objective. The reason for this is because research on brainstorming has shown that usually it's your 5th, or it's not your first idea that's always the best one. So if we kind of throw out a couple different ideas, you might use one of them in an earlier learning activity. You might throw some of them out, but the idea is to kind of get some more authentic tasks out there. So our goal is by 2 o'clock to have a Google Doc with at least 3 authentic tasks. and then to email these to your content and education guide. Also, if you're—
Instead of saying 2 o'clock, say how many minutes or hours from now.
I'm sorry, in an hour and a half.
Okay,
2, 1, 12, or 11, depending on your time zone. And then please email the Google Doc link to your education and content guide so we can kind of give feedback. If you're still working on learning objectives for some of your sections, if you would also work on those, that would be helpful. And of course, take breaks, eat lunch, whatever as needed. Any questions before we head out into partner time? All right.
Yes, if this was an in-person workshop, you would be supplying a coffee break right now with donuts and cookies. So I guess I think you should all go have a cookie and a coffee or a juice or whatever you need to.
Yeah, definitely take breaks wherever you need.
So I have a question, Melissa. It's is these 3 authentic tasks an objective for us to have 3 authentic tasks in the module, or is this going to be more like do the exercise, see if you can come up with a number of them, and then probably use a few of them or select one or something like this? What is the idea?
Yeah, the latter is the idea. So this is a brainstorming exercise. And so you'll get kind of at least 3 authentic tasks out there. And then you might decide that 2 of them really aren't as good as the other and you're going to just pick one to go with. Or maybe you like all 3 and you want to use all 3. But the objective is to kind of brainstorm and get the ideas out there and then pick at least one. So in the afternoon session, we'll pick one to move forward with and create a learning activity of 4.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I'll go ahead and put you in your rooms. Feel free, of course, to go take a coffee break or a lunch break, depending on your time zone. Of course, I'll stay in the main room in case anybody wants to ask questions. Thanks. So we're going to start with an announcement from Imad. Imad, are you here with us?
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, well, thank you, Song, for sharing this with us. It's a very interesting work. I used to do a CFD fluid, simulations long time ago. So it's really great to see how the science has advanced. Yeah, I have just a brief announcement. I know we talked, earlier at a time when we were processing applications about attending the different sessions and so forth, and appreciate everybody's attention and dedication to the workshop. Everything is going really great. I just want to drop a note that if you know that you'll be absent or away, during one of these sessions, please send us a note in advance. This way we know that you're just going to be away for that session or that hour, to help us stay organized and also aware of where everybody is.
Who should they notify that they are going to miss a session?
I'm sorry?
Who should they notify if they know they're going to miss a session?
You can send me an email or send your content guide would be fine too. Or Melissa, anybody in the team, really, it's okay. Whoever you prefer to communicate to, whether Melissa or the content subject, the content matters. Myself, Dan, and David, and Belize, and Melissa and Doc.
Really anyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Imad. So I thought we would pick up where we left off last time and share in our groups. So now you've come up with a bunch of authentic tasks. So I'd like you to, with your partnership, you're going to pick one that you want to share with your content team. So the way we'll do this is that one partnership will share their kind of favorite task, or maybe the task they're leaning towards, or it could even be a task that you're super unsure of and you want feedback on. And then the others will kind of take turns giving feedback, and then you'll move on to the next group. So does that kind of make sense? Our goal with this is to start to lock in on the task that you might want to write your learning activity for, because our next thing that we're going to do is begin to write or create your final learning activity. So you're trying to, the goal of this is to help refine the tasks you have so you can kind of be ready for that next activity that we're going to do. All right, any questions on that before I open up the groups for you?
Are we gonna have a chance to talk to our small group before we talk to the big group, or are we going straight into the big groups?
We're gonna go straight into the big groups. Does that work?
Okay. Yeah. I was just wanted to check because I don't know. I don't know that our group didn't decide on one task, but we can through the chat window. That's fine.
Yeah, you can use the chat to decide on that. So maybe you can chat to each other while whoever, if somebody knows quickly what they want to do, maybe that will work. All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms. All right, well, hopefully most people got to share. I know some groups were still sharing, but I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about things that will be included in a learning activity. So I apologize if I cut you off a little bit there. So we're going to look at a learning activity together to see the kinds of things that we include in that in HydroLearn. So you have this slide and the link to this here if you want to take a look at it. This is in the Beaubassin detention basin, which we were looking at the tasks for it earlier, and it's the very last learning activity. So as you look through this, I want you to look from the perspective of a student. What are the kind of components of the learning activity, and how does it help you as a student understand the expectations? So I'll have it up here on my screen, but you also have the link in your slides if you want to look through and look at the different components here. As you notice things that would help you as a student, just go ahead and note them in the chat.
And Melissa, if I may say something. I guess we picked this particular activity without suggesting that this is the best example or even a very good example. It's really to drive the discussions, right, Melissa? So feel free to say that, this is not helpful or I don't think this is useful or something like that.
I mean, I picked it because I think you did a really great job with it, Ahmad, but
okay, well, thank you.
Ahmad is apparently also open to other feedback. So I think that's helpful to know too, that this learning activity has been through many iterations and revisions.
Right.
And so I think it's pretty solid, but of course there are always opportunities to think about other things that could be done.
There are very bright brains in this room, so I would put that disclaimer out there.
So what are things that you've noticed that might help a student understand, as a student, what would help you understand the expectations?
Can you send them the link, Melissa? Maybe they can browse in their own computer. I think it's an open one.
I put the link in the chat for those who need it.
Yeah.
So Joanne mentioned about the size of the figures. Yeah, that's definitely something Jenny is going to talk to you all about with pages. Right, Jenny? Did I get it right? Not right now, but
with images, I can't remember what day we said we were going to discuss that, but in particular, I discussed how to make them larger.
So I see Erin took a look at the results template. Viviana noticed the checking in questions, which kind of help to make sure students are on the right track. So if they've made an error somewhere, it'll help direct them. Dave made a good point. In some other learning activities, instructors have chosen to do screen captures or videos to kind of show or walk through steps, and that has been helpful. So that might be something we could consider adding to this learning activity.
Yeah, this is something we're actually missing here.
Any other components that you notice as helpful? Joe noticed the rubric.
In the research and site visit section, I see it lists an example article to read and maybe some information on local consolidated government. Are the students expected really to just use these two resources, or do they go above that, or do you list more or give more, say, in class, or would they know how deep to go into that, I guess, level of research?
That was in an earlier activity, I believe,
Very
right?
first section, yeah.
Yeah, I was looking through the research and site visit section.
Yes, it's a different activity, Melissa, if you want to. But these were just two examples. I think you can definitely, open it up more, for them to look for other resources. But sometimes if I leave it too open, the students may not find anything in particular because maybe it's not easy to find these resources. But we prefer.
So I like that. Yeah, you just basically are suggesting one or two, and then so that they can get an idea, I suppose, because sometimes a person doesn't even know where to start.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Like that.
And sometimes these things are really hidden in the, online, that you cannot find them easily. So.
Yeah. And then sometimes you find all kinds of things online that are just useless.
Yes, exactly.
So you all noticed a lot of the things that we consider to be components of a strong learning activity. Clear directions, including, as Dave mentioned, screenshots or maybe screen capture videos showing how to kind of go through or the directions of steps to follow. Templates for reporting results. At the end of that learning activity was in the summary questions, is where the authentic task was. And then constructive alignment between the learning objectives and the activities. And we'll talk more about this constructive alignment and the rubrics in the coming days. So these are the three things we're kind of focusing on for today. So before we were, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to cut in. So as to that module created by Ahmad, I have a question for example, in one of the section learning activity, for example, I'm looking at the precipitation one, and the very last subsection is learning activity. There's some summary question, so that helps students to answer some questions, so they can include in their description, and description is something they are supposed to turn in. Actually, I don't see where to submit that description. Is that something students need to email, or that may be an actionable action?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically we don't put in HydroLearn where students should submit, because every faculty or instructor who uses the module might choose to have them submitted in a different way. So rather we ask that the instructor tells the students, you're going to submit this through Blackboard, or you're going to submit through email. Imad, do you agree with the way that I presented that?
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah, I think
go
at the very top, we have a results template. If you can scroll up to Melissa, if you don't mind. We have a results template, and if you open that results template, you will find a placeholder there for the students to answer those summary questions. And that's where they put their answers, or at least that's what they are asked to put, including their answers. And like Melissa said, there's a way in HydroLearn where students can actually submit stuff in HydroLearn. They can submit a file or something like that, but we chose not really to promote that, because it's up to every professor. If they're using their own LMS, they can ask their students to just submit there. This way it's your site and you manage it. Right.
So considering that, so when we make our own module, so we should consider that, try to make our module at least for example, this part, we should make it generic, or make it more like a template, so other faculty or whoever wants to use our module can adapt to accommodate their needs, correct?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the template here is really for the students. It's a template for them to see what they have to submit, and make sure that they don't miss any points, or they submit everything that they need to submit. So that template is for the students to put their answers. The whole module is in HydroLearn. If somebody wants to take it and repackage it, then that's great. But like you said, you develop it in a way that others can actually take it and adapt it. So it should not be really hardwired. I think Dan talked about it early on, that you should not have here saying, go to the lab in Madison Hall and campus so-and-so and check out this something, or a software that I only have access to, or things like that, right?
I see. Thanks.
Great question.
All right. I'm a typical student because I clicked on the web soul survey and I got this encrypted message back. Maybe it's my computer or something, an embedded page and web soul survey. I got a load script error. And so at this point, I don't think as a student, I would know what to do.
Yes, yeah. If you click on a start new session, does that help or not? Okay.
And this is the kind of stuff that happens to me all the time. And I wind up spending a lot of time answering student questions or trying to find someone who can answer it for me.
Right, yeah. And so Melissa, when you click on start a new session, it does not do anything, right? Yeah, this is a problem with this particular app. And maybe we need to, yeah, I guess the simple answer here is that maybe it's not a good idea to embed it inside HydroLearn, this particular app, and it's just better to provide a link. And
well, I was actually excited that it was there, because I tried to get my students to use it separately, but they pretty much got lost. I provide a hyperlink to where I want them to go, but they weren't getting to the right data. And
yeah,
I really thought, oh, that'd be fantastic if it was embedded and they just kind of linked right to it.
Yeah, well, I like that feedback, actually, to be honest with you, because I never really got that kind of feedback on whether it's better to keep it in the system or to have an external link. So we will look.
Yeah, I'd keep it.
Right. We will look in particular why we're getting this message. The app, the web page itself it works. Maybe that particular link that we provide. So we'll look more into it.
So these are kind of the key things we want you to think about as you're thinking about a learning activity. And so we have a template for you in the Fellows folder. It's called the Learning Activity Template. And what we'd like you to do with your next partner session is to make a copy of this template and save it into your folders, and pick that authentic task that you're really thinking of doing for your final kind of culminating learning activity, and start to think through what would the results include. Start writing it up so that tomorrow we'll put it directly into HydroLearn and start building it into your module. That makes sense.
Oh.
So we're gonna come back at 5 Eastern, 4 Central, 3 Mountain, or 2 Pacific. And we're going to kind of learn some more about how to start putting that into HydroLearn. So in these next 2 hours, if you can work with your partner to create a learning activity. If you create one using the template and everybody's gung-ho and you want to do a second, then you're getting ahead of the ball, and that'll help you meet our deadlines in time. Or if you need to take a longer break and just get one done, that's fine too. When you've done that, if you'll please email your content and education guides. Not everybody's been remembering to do that, but that helps us to kind of keep checking in and know where everybody is. Any questions before I put you back in your partner rooms?
That's good.
So, Melissa, I'm looking at some of the old learning activities. The one we just looked at, which is the design of a detention basin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we do not want to recreate the wheel in here, could we, like, for example, the rubric in here, the template? Because in my case, the activity will be designing a detention basin using PC Swim instead of like HMS in there. I think that goes to both Imad and you, Melissa, in there. Is it okay to maybe clone or duplicate, maybe do a little bit of modifications, change the names instead of like HMS to like PC Swim? Or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say also that this module that you are looking at, I adapted that from an earlier work that David Tarbalan and his student Madeline Merck did. So I did what you did, what you're asking now, and
Okay.
you can do the same thing to my module, and hopefully what you will do is even better than the previous two. So absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it will take some tweaking, maybe significant tweaking, but at least you'll have a good starting point to go from. When we first wrote these rubrics, they were awful, they were terrible. So, there was some effort. I remember my Olivia, another student, and Jenny. We sat in a conference room going over these back, several times and trying them in the classroom. And students come back and complain that, I didn't see that in the rubric. I don't know what you're talking about here. So it takes an effort to build a good rubric. And
you are correct. That's my experience with the senior design. Actually, if we do not include it in the rubric, they think it's not required. So and that's why I always try to be as detailed as possible, spell out all the expectations, even when I talk about any subsection like the constraints or the sizing or the outlet structure. They practically, if you don't include it in the rubric or your expectations, if you have like an expectations document, they do not believe they have to submit that.
Yeah, very good point. So yeah, you're welcome to make modifications to modules that exist.
Okay.
So I would just want to elaborate a little bit on. There's actually 2 aspects to what's being asked, at least that I think of. One is the sort of the copying right to use type of considerations. And we have to be sensitive to the fact that we're using other people's work here. And I think what we've tried to with HydroLearn is make clear that the license on the content is a Creative Commons license that allows people to do that. So where you can give credit in a practical way, it's probably a good thing to do. But sometimes, I mean, if it's just a small thing, I think the Creative Commons license will let you do that. The other aspect of it is the sort of practical copying of a subset. Right now, we only really have the technical ability to copy an entire module. There are opportunities for copying sections within modules, or duplicating sections within modules, but you might have to do a little bit of fiddling if you want to actually copy the sort of save yourself the work of retyping. So sometimes you might actually have to do the sort of reconstructing yourself, that might just following what you're seeing, because sometimes the technical copying is a little bit hard, at least in my experience. Maybe Jenny's got a better answer.
You're right, David. You're right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jenny. You're going to say something.
Sudi, I think if you just want to copy a part of that activity, you can just, you should be able to just copy and paste the text or retype part of that text. If you want something bigger to copy and paste, then I'm happy to maybe have Jenny go your way to help your group with that.
Yeah. Thank you. And yesterday, actually, we had a little bit of discussion about embedding some images or YouTube videos from whatever publicly available on the domain out there on the web, and we acknowledge the source. And I'm not sure where we stand on this one in here. Now, I use these in my classes. The thing is, I use them and I just click on them on the web through the browser. Now, if we are, I think it is more of a copyright question. This is, given this HydroLearn is an open source, I'm trying to limit myself to maybe government documents in terms of images and some material in there, without trying to get like a written permit to include a table from a textbook or something like that. So is there any rule of thumb when it comes to this copywriting stuff and HydroLearn?
Dave, I know you've done a lot more work with it.
I guess you have to just respect the content that you're getting. So if the content is available on the web somewhere else, for example, in a YouTube video, you don't necessarily have to copy it. You can just say, go to look at it where it is. And then you're not actually copying it, you're just referring to it. And that's fine. If you've got an image and you actually then embedding the image, you should be cognizant of whatever limitations the person has put on that in terms of where it's coming from. And they may, I guess we should probably ourselves and encourage everybody to put licenses on any work that we put on the internet that says explicitly how it can be reused. So if you put the Creative Commons license on it, then you're basically saying, I'm giving this away to people to use creatively, and please go ahead and do it. And that's making it clear what you're allowing. The worst thing is a website that does not make it clear, because then you don't actually know. Some websites will say that, well, there's different natures of Creative Commons licenses. Some require attribution, some are limited to non-commercial use. So then you basically have to look at what that license says and decide if your use fits with what the producer has allowed.
And Melissa, maybe sometime, over the next week or so, we can have like a 10-minute overview of how you can designate the license for the content that we are creating in this workshop, right?
Have that planned for one of the last days. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put you all in your breakout rooms to start working on your learning activities. Feel free to hang out if you have any additional questions. And actually, you're still in your content group, so I'm going to put you in the groups and then quickly move you into your partner groups as well. All right, well, I hope everybody's afternoon is going well so far. Everybody got a nice cold glass of water or an afternoon coffee, or I know Dave Tarbotton's floating around here with an afternoon ice cream. I'm a little jealous. Hopefully that was a productive work time for everyone. we're going to kind of regroup, talk about a few things together, and then set you off for the day. We have made some changes to the slides from earlier, so hopefully you've been able to see those changes. Christina made a point earlier that the times of when our sessions are going to be has not always been presented in a very straightforward way to you. Part of the reason for that is because different days have different sessions, and part of the reason is because of the different time zones. So I added this slide to your presentation. Doug commented that it takes a PhD to be able to figure out this table. So hopefully you all have the needed credentials for that. These dates for the remaining of our sessions together, we'll have 2 working sessions with partner time in the middle. So you'll notice that that's 1 longer partner work time as opposed to the 2 chunks that we've been having the last 2 days. And these are the times that they each start. And then on these 2 days, which are our 2 half days, this is how we'll divide up that time. So we put these in your slides so you have access to them. So hopefully this is a little more helpful in knowing when we have sessions and how long those will last. And I apologize for not being as clear with that up front. So I wanted to give you an authentic task to check out. This comes from one of our fellows from the first time around. And so I put it in here. This is in this part of the authentic task. He actually introduces in his introduction section in the module overview. And the first paragraph kind of gives an overall view of the whole module, but the second paragraph here is where it starts. And so I thought I would give everyone a few minutes to kind of read that over and think about what you notice about how he frames the problem. So what do you all notice about how Corey framed the problem to the students? If you want to put what you're noticing, your observations in the group chat, I think that would be a good way to think about this. Great, there's some great noticings popping up in the chat. Yeah, a few people have made a comment similar to Mark's, which is that there's some intrinsic motivation. Like this is kind of an interesting problem to want to come up with a solution for. And I think it was Joanne who said that there's not just one right answer to this either. So students could get passionate about, maybe even debate theirs. There's also detailed background in here. A few people have noticed that too. So there's really a story. There's a lot of information being introduced, and this is in the introduction, and he comes back to this problem and scenario throughout the module. So he kind of gives this background and then brings it back and threads it throughout the module. Damien pointed out that it's a role play. He says, you are a board member. He doesn't even say imagine or anything else. He says, you are. I think that's an interesting way to frame it. And at the end, he gives them a clear thing, which is to bring a plan to the next board meeting. So they have a clear audience of who they're writing for and what that plan is. So rather than where so many assignments we write for the teacher or students write for the teacher, these students now are writing for the next board meeting. And I don't think that they really are writing for the next board meeting, but that is a kind of communication that they might need to know how to do. So I kind of wanted to give you that, not saying that this is how your authentic tasks have to be framed, but I want to show you kind of a variety of different tasks that we have out there, because maybe that will be useful to you in thinking through your tasks. All right, I am going to hand it over to Jenny now. You are muted, Jenny.
Thank you. It's been a long day, hasn't it? Day 2. All right, everybody. So I'm going to show you how to create a learning activity within Studio. So now you've seen excellent examples and demonstrations of how this is done and the different ways that you can do it. So I'm going to show you specifically the component within Studio that provides this learning activity template for you to use as, a starting point for you. And then once I show you how to do a learning activity, I'm going to move on to another super hot topic, iframes. Very cool. Once I show you the iframes as a component, I'm then going to show you how you can use iframes as a page, like you saw earlier in the Bobacine module. So let's start here. This is my module template, which looks pretty similar to yours. So within this learning activity, we already have one example provided. And there's also directions of how to insert a learning activity right here. So if you forget, it's available for you in the slides and here. But to do a learning activity, click Advanced. You go to Add New Component at the bottom of your unit. Add New Component, Advanced, and then Learning Activity Template. And then when you're ready to edit it, you just click the Edit button, like all of the components. And then this will populate here and you'll be able to edit everything. But naturally, my internet is extremely slow. But just trust me, that works. There should be things there. So that's the learning activity. Let's see if it loaded. Yeah, see here it is, edit. Okay, there we go. And one thing that I would like to note is that yesterday morning we did a deployment where we updated this. This is actually an advanced text component. And we're aware of this issue, but I do want to point it out for you because it is going to be resolved. You can see here, it looks a little odd. We have numbers here and bullets, but when you're looking within your studio, it's not obvious that they're there. However, when you preview or publish your changes, you see it rendered here. So the formatting is accurate, it is present, but for whatever reason, it's not visible in Studio. And our developers are working on this right now, and it should be resolved shortly. So that is a learning activity template. It has everything that you've seen in that Google document, the title, intro. The results should include, you can do a bullet list of text, or even insert a table right here. And then we have the list of instructions and then the summary questions. Within this activity, you can always break it up by embedding videos or images or anything like that, like you've seen in our examples from earlier in the day. So before I move away from learning activities, this template specifically, does anyone have any questions?
Hey, hey Jenny, this is Adam Ward. Hey, I have just a quick question for you. So I noticed that you can create these multiple text boxes, and then I can either embed a video inside of a text box, or I can just create a video as its own standalone element. My question is if there's a preference from the backend side as to why I would do one or the other, or if it's just flexibility and you don't care if we do, yeah, exactly like this. I could do that video separate, or I could embed it inside a text box. And why might I pick one or the other? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Adam. That's actually a good question. We don't have a preference because the functionality is the same. You know, you're going to have a video and it's going to be the same dimensions. The only difference that I could think of is that when you have the video component like on its own, then you have like a little bar within your page, within your unit, like this little bar right here, that sort of breaks things up a bit more. So if I just inserted a video inside of this one box, text box, you wouldn't have that little delineating bar. That's the only difference.
I would say one other difference is that you can reorder the things that are within a unit, and you can only reorder the video if it's its own component. If it's within a text, then you can reorder the whole text box, but you can't move. It's harder to move the video, but that's only if you're planning on changing the order. So
a question I have is giving background information within a learning activity. When I was developing one, there was some background information about, basically to provide context for the learning activity, which wasn't necessarily part of the lesson objectives, but it was basically to create that authenticity. And I'm just wondering, where in this learning activity template do you actually put some background or authenticity information like what we just read earlier?
For that, you can have a separate unit for that. It doesn't, if you feel like it doesn't fit within, an introductory to the activity, you can always put it right before the activity in its own unit, if that makes sense. Yeah, so here we have the background information. Maybe this is what you're referencing. So this could be an area where you put additional information that is related to your activity, but isn't necessarily an introduction to it.
But you can also put it inside the learning activity itself. If it's really tied to the activity, you can put it there. There's nothing wrong with that. In the template that Jenny just showed, once you open that template, you can really put anything you want there. Am I correct, Jenny?
Yes, yeah, you definitely can. This is
You
highly
can add
adaptable.
more text. This is just a guided template, but you can add any text you want.
All right, so Ahmad, so you review the content, so I would appreciate your feedback on that outline of the learning activity and see if that's appropriate, because that, it was a question I had when I was developing that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we can talk about it. If you already email it to me, I'll definitely look at it. And I'm sorry if yeah, I see an email from you, and I'm sorry I did not see it on time.
Well, it's okay. It just got there.
Okay, so those are some excellent questions about activities. Do y'all have any more for me before I move on?
Actually, I'd like to add on to the answer to Willie's question. And some module creators have chosen to weave the same case study throughout, like the Beaubassin is a substantial module all centered in Beaubassin. So the learning activity that we were looking at earlier, where students design the detention basin, they've been learning about Beaubassin consistently throughout the module. If the case or the kind of context of your authentic problem is only showing up in that learning activity, then I think it makes sense to put the background just in that learning activity. But if it's going to show up throughout that section and you're going to build different things off of it, then you want to present it earlier. If you're going to center the whole module on it, then you want to put it at the very beginning of the module. So I don't think there's one right answer, but it's about how much you're going to situate, or how much of the module you're going to situate within that context would determine when you would bring it in.
Okay. So let's move on to iframes. So iframe is the tool that we use to embed an external resource into HydroLearn. You can put iframes within a unit, or you can put iframes as a page. And I'm going to show you how to do both of those things right now. So the iframe, if you want to add an iframe, go to Add New Component, the HTML button here, and then it's called the iframe tool. And as you can see, the iframe tool comes with some pretty detailed instructions already. I think the important thing to note is that when you modify the URL, it must be from a secure website. So it has to say HTTPS at the beginning of the URL. And then in order to edit this component, you just click the edit button. And a lot of this is just extraneous, details that you're not going to need for your particular iframe. So what I like to do is I like to get rid of all of these extra lines of code that I'm not going to need. And of course, you don't have to do that. That's up to you. So you may choose to keep maybe some of the headers and these paragraph tags so you can add some information, maybe around your iframe, above or below. But you can also put those in a text box if you prefer. So these are, in essence, just the few lines of code that you're going to need, and you can adapt these to suit your needs. So here, in between these little paragraph tags, you can add some text. The things that you do need to change are the title. So this example, I already have a website pulled up. It's the NOAA precipitation frequency, I can't remember exactly, but you change the title in between the quotation marks. And now I'm going to go grab my source URL.
Precipitation frequency data server.
Thank you. So here, as you'll notice, this is a secure website. So it has the HTTPS. I'm going to copy all of that, go back to my learning activity, and replace all of the source code within the quotation marks. You can also change the width and the height of your iframe. And this is at your discretion because it really depends on what the students are viewing your module on. So if it's like a tablet or a laptop or even a cell phone, this will vary. In general, I start with like 1,000 pixels, maybe 1,500, and I go from there. It's really just, you just need to play with it and see what works best for you. The other thing that I always look at is the scrolling option. It's pretty much always a good idea to just put yes here. This allows the users to scroll within this iframe. So let's go ahead and press OK. Let's see what we did. It's a little slow in loading, but there it is. So now we can see it down here at the bottom of our page. Instead of preview and see what it looks like live. So it'll just take a second to load on my end, and it looks pretty good. So these are the scroll bars that we enabled. The students are able to interact with the website without ever having to leave HydroLearn. So if you have an external resource that you think the students will need to reference frequently throughout the module, so this is something they may come back to as they move through your module, you can always copy this few lines of code and insert it as a page. And I'll show you exactly what a page is. We did see some excellent examples in the previous section. So the pages are those permanent tabs at the top of the module. So no matter where the students are within their learning, they always see these up at the top. So that's what the pages look like from the learner's point of view. If you're working from the module template that you imported yesterday, you'll see that I already have stream stats loaded up as an example iframe. And to add an iframe from within your studio, you click Content and then Pages. You can add a new page. Click Edit. I'm going to go back to HTML and insert the code that I copied and click Save. So now this should look exactly like it did with the unit, except now that it's available as a page. If you want to change the title of the page, you go to Settings and you change the display name and click Save. And this is saved automatically, so when we go to View Live, we'll see our new page. There it is. For pages, I find that the best pixel width and height is around 1500 pixels each. So I'll go back and show you to edit that. Right here, I'll just make it a bit larger. But like I said, it's pretty much trial and error, and it's going to look different depending on what device the students are viewing your module on. So that concludes my demonstration for learning activities and iframes, and including a new page and also putting an iframe as a page. What questions do y'all have for me before I return you to Melissa?
And we do have a thunderstorm actually here in Lafayette area, so maybe that's why the quality is bad. We can probably do another demo early morning tomorrow, just for 10 minutes or something in the morning. You know, hopefully the connection will be a little better.
So do you want to comment on which of these components that you showed are the sort of extra components that we've added as part of HydroLearn, and which are the ones that come generically with edX? Because I guess at some level, if you're just using HydroLearn, it doesn't matter. But some of these things are what we've tried to add to sort of give this a good pedagogical framework.
You know, I'll let you speak to that, David, because
well, I don't know which ones are the ones.
Yeah, I think we added definitely the learning objective.
Yeah.
learning objectives. We had we had either the template or the wizard. We also have the templates for the learning activities. We have the, I forgot how many, but few, and special text editing, X-Block, they call it, or a tool. So yeah, so a few ones that we added to the system. And I think the module template should also be a good addition here because it kind of guides you through the different components of the module. So like I suggested, we can go tomorrow over the iframes again. Sometimes the simplest thing is just you provide the link, the hyperlink, and the student can just open that in a new tab, right? That's okay too. If you don't want to overcomplicate things, it's nice to have it inside the module. This way, it's right there. The student doesn't have to leave the site, but you can always hyperlink it. And Jenny, did we go over how to hyperlink? I think that's simple enough, right? I don't think we need to go over.
We can go over that on the day when I think we have more in-depth discussion on the different components lined up for y'all.
Right. And just a warning here: if you embed the iframe as a page, as a separate page, if you toggle between the lesson and that page, when you come back to the lesson, you don't necessarily come back to the same place. So the ones that I put in the page are not necessarily tied to like specific steps I'm doing. It's more of a resource. But if I want the students to use that tool inside the learning activity, I either embed it inside the learning activity or have it as an external map where they just open it in a different browser or something like that. We can go over more that a little bit tomorrow morning when the connection is a little better.
Hi, this is Tao. I have a technical question about this iframe. As we import the external page using this iframe, how sensitive the iframe is to the change of the web page on the other side? Because sometimes when I'm teaching like a data science, when I'm using Python 2.7, and then sometimes some library got upgraded, and then sometimes I need to rewrite everything. Do we have this type of problem with iframe?
Well, I'm not a programmer, but maybe Dave or Dan can speak better to how those iframes work, but you are basically embedding an external source into the lesson here. So it's, whatever happens there is going to be reflected onto your page here. So if something is broken there, it's going to be broken in your own page, in your own module. It's really embedding, it's an iframe, right? So you're just taking the whole thing and just putting it inside your page. If it works from the first time, it should work, but if that page gets broken, I think it will impact yours. But it does not depend on versioning or anything like that. If they change the version there, or I don't think it should reflect here because we are really using it as an iframe.
Okay, thanks.
You can, I think the best use for these things is not necessarily embedding an entire page, because in that situation, you might just as well send the students there, right? I mean, it might be just easier that way. But there are also learning, like they call them like tools, or where you can just plug it in there and the students can, it's like a little toy that people can play with, and it's embedded there as an iframe.
I see, like the string stats from USGS, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, that one, or even the example that Jenny was just showed that comes with edX. It's more like, if you have like a little animation, so it can, scroll back and forth and watch what's happening with it, or maybe a little widget that you can play with to learn about something. So, but you can also embed the whole page like we did. So it's really anything that's embeddable. There are certain things that are designed to be embedded as iframe, I think.
I see, thanks.
I mean, are there things that you need to be careful of? Like, for example, this morning we saw that the iframe of the soil survey was not working, but you could actually go to that link outside of an iframe and it did seem to work. So there may be some websites that are are fragile in some sense. And I guess I don't know that I really would understand why.
Yes. Some of them are not designed to be embedded, but they could. So when you try to embed them, sometimes they don't work ideally, or the way they're supposed to work, I think.
Yeah, you can also run into cross-reference issues. Some websites are specifically programmed. They have a little header in them that doesn't allow them to be embedded. But for the most part, I think if you're looking at a, a graph of a flow or a map that somebody else is hosting and you want to always be able to see their map, I think the iframe is a nice little way to do that. And going to Tao Wen's comment, I would suggest also, if you're really just pulling up a piece of content from another web page, you have to weigh the benefit of literally just copying and pasting that content into your lesson and then appropriately referencing and citing where you got that content from. Because if you do that, then you'll always have it there. But if it's an interactive thing, like if you want to embed the USGS stream stats, well, you can't just copy and paste. You need it. You could just link to the web page, or you might embed it in iframe. So lots of options, and I guess that's what this is all about. It's just exposing you all to the options, letting you think about what makes the most sense.
And maybe also tomorrow morning we can show, you can also embed like a Google-like map. If you want to develop like a mashup of shape files, that you have already on your computer, you can put them on I think there's like something called My Map or something from Google, where you can build a mashup of different shape files and embed it inside the module. It works really well. We can show an example of that tomorrow also, to give some context to where, if you have a watershed and you want to show people where it is, it can be very, very powerful actually.
So one of the reasons we wanted to show you these things as you're thinking about your learning activities is because you may choose to embed an iframe in your learning activity if that fits for you. So what we'd like you to think about for today and kind of our as we wrap up and think about setting ourselves up for tomorrow is once you've gotten feedback from your co-PIs and you feel ready to go, to begin creating your learning activity in HydroLearn. And so if you've already created it in the Google Doc, that's basically a cut and paste type of activity there. You can use the learning activity template component as Jenny showed you, but also we set that the learning activity template up to follow the learning activity template in Google Docs to be the same as the learning activity template in HydroLearn. So you can also just copy what you created in the learning activity Google Doc and paste it into a regular text box, and it should be pretty similar. And then tomorrow we're going to continue to share and refine the learning activities and talk about rubrics and adding rubrics to those and some other functionality as well. So Christina has a question in the chat. She asked if anyone has embedded an ArcGIS story map with an iframe.
Jenny, do you have a recollection of how Belize tried to do that, embedding Esri's story map within HydroLearn? I think it did work, but
I think it works. Yeah, I think she's got it embedded. If you look in her module, is Belize on? She might be here.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, I forgot. Yes, sorry, Belize.
Oh, that's okay. So I do have a story map in the physical hydrology module. I believe we chose not to embed it and actually to just link to it, because it felt a little bit clunky to have it contained within there, because you kind of, I don't know, in my opinion, it was nicer to just link to another screen and have all of it there. So I'm not sure that we actually went through that full process, but it still felt integrated.
And sometimes it's just see what makes most sense, having things independent is good, overcomplicating things are not necessarily the best thing. It really depends on, you can do a lot of stuff with HydroLearn, but I usually, I learn not to force things if they don't really If they can just work in a much simpler way, okay, maybe that's even better. The one I find most useful is embedding maps, because when you embed a map, you can put shape files and you can, which can, be really helpful and without really having to rely on ArcGIS or QGIS or something like that. And that one you can embed it inside the module and it becomes really useful. Jenny, do you have one ready from like the boba scene or something? I forgot. We have one where so maybe while we're working on this, if you can bring it up. If not, we can show it tomorrow. Melissa,
Yes,
I'm not sure what's next on the agenda, so I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, Jenny, go ahead. What did you say?
I can share the screen real quick and show the Google map. I have it pulled up. Okay. So this is in the Bobacine module that everyone saw earlier, and this is a Google map that I created in Google My Maps. And within that website, you can copy a specific link to embed it elsewhere. They give you that option. But within this map, the students can interact and click different layers and see information about them.
And you build this map in my Google Maps, right, Jenny?
Yes, this was created using Google My Map.
Right, and it's very simple to do it over there. Actually, if you have a bunch of KMLs or shape files, you can literally drag and drop, and it's very simple to create these things and then bring them here. They give a lot of context to the activities. And you can embed that inside the lesson itself, inside the actual lesson, not as a page.
Yes, you can do it in an iframe in the same way that I showed you with NOAA PFDS. But you do need to get a specific link from Google My Maps that includes this little embed in it in order for this one to work. You can't just copy the URL from the web browser.
And that one will always work because Google designed it so that you can actually embed it inside your own page.
Those people at Google are so smart.
Right, it's really for embedding, and they have a link that says copy embed link. So it's as simple as that. It's very simple.
And then you're safe, it'll always work. Always,
So,
as long as Google's still around.
Right.
So the way we're going to wrap things up today is actually in our partner groups. So what we'd like is that when we start tomorrow, that you have something in HydroLearn for your learning activity. So if that means you want to spend some time now doing more revisions to your learning activity, or if you want to copy and paste it in, or if you're on the East Coast and it's the end of your day and you'd rather work on this tomorrow morning, you can make that decision. Or if you're on the Pacific Coast and you want to work at 5 a.m., that's up to you as well. So I think I'm going to send you off to your groups with two kind of main goals. One is to talk through some of these features you just saw to see, are any of these going to fit into your learning activity? You might talk about how you might use them in other aspects of the module, but I would encourage you not to spin out and talking of all the different ways you might possibly integrate this. So which of these tools might you integrate into your learning activity? And then when do you want to get that learning activity up in HydroLearn? Do you want to do it now? Do you want to do it tomorrow morning? Do you want to divide and conquer and somebody takes it today and somebody does the next learning activity in HydroLearn? So those are your two goals, is to discuss these tools in HydroLearn and then decide how you're going to get your first learning activity up in HydroLearn. Any questions about those? And then once you're done, you can just leave from your partner groups. You don't have to come back to the main room.